I'm Siena. I'm the kid.
I'm Sarah. I'm the mom.
This is Queer Kid Straight Mom.
Let's talk. Welcome back to Queer Kids Straight Mom. Today we are talking about gender affirming care, what that actually is. Spoiler alert, it's not any of the really scary things that people say it is. We're going to talk about what it actually is, what it looks like, and what are the reasons that people decide that it's an important choice that they need to make.
Yeah, and we're doing it in the context of I started gender affirming testosterone about a year ago, a little bit under a year ago. And so we're going to be kind of sharing some of this information in the context of my experience and what that has looked like. As an obvious disclaimer, none of this is medical advice. Consult a qualified physician before attempting any gender affirming treatment. But yeah,
maybe let's start people off. A lot of you already probably know this, but for anybody that doesn't, that is new to these issues or new to the podcast. And, I'm feeling in the aftermath of the election that it's really important for us to make sure that, a lot of times we say, oh, you guys already know this, or, if you're here, you already know this. But I want to make sure that we are being inclusive of people that really want more information and not make assumptions about our listeners. So with that in mind, when people mention gender affirming care, what does that look like? And I know it's different across a range of ages. So maybe starting with minors.
Okay, so your first step typically is not a medical one. It might involve some counseling, a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, and also just, allowing kids to explore their gender presentation and explore different pronouns. And then once you actually start getting into the physical medical aspects, the first thing that'll look like is hormone blockers, puberty blockers. So those will typically begin pre-puberty because they prevent puberty. They prevent the puberty that is associated with the person's assigned sex, which can provide a little bit of time if the person is unsure of whether or not they want to start hormone replacement therapy. They also just, block the hormones that their body is producing that will cause their body to go through unwanted changes.
Really quickly, I think there are a lot of misconceptions even around puberty blockers. My understanding is one of the reasons that doctors feel that this is a really safe course is that they're mostly reversible. And when I say reversible, I mean that when you stop taking them, your body goes back to where it was and will go through the puberty that it was going to go through naturally.
Right. A certain man afflicted with a brainworm whose name shall not be mentioned, but is going to be in charge of the Department of Health and Human Services, has referred to them as castration drugs, which is just not the case. Surely, there might be rare circumstances where something goes wrong, where a person's body doesn't catch back up. But broadly speaking, yeah, these are very well understood drugs. They're used for cisgender children who have early onset puberty. And I think one of the major concerns is oh, there are these impacts that we've seen from people being on them for extended periods of time. But keep in mind that those are typically also linked to things like bone density loss, which comes not from puberty blockers themselves, but from not having other hormones. So if someone either goes off of them or pursues hormone replacement therapy, that problem is largely mitigated.
And when you say, things can go wrong, to me, that's a reason why it's important to recognize things like this as medical treatments, not fringe things that are happening out there, because recognizing it as standard medical care means that it can be, doctors can learn about it and fully understand it, and it's regulated properly and all of those things. We don't want people going and trying to find whoever will prescribe this medication because their state is preventing doctors from doing it, right?
It's a real thing that happens. There are documented cases prior to it being something that doctors could or would prescribe more easily. Yeah, there are documented cases of people who were so desperate for hormone therapy that they would go to, unlicensed, just random people off the street and end up getting really hurt or really sick because of it.
Okay, so that's puberty blockers.
So typically, the next step, if an individual continues experiencing dysphoria, wanting to continue their transition, the next step will be hormone replacement therapy, which, you know, obviously looks different depending on the gender presentation that you're trying to achieve. But broadly speaking, that means estrogen and progesterone for transgender women and testosterone for transgender men. And then non binary people might be, either one of those, obviously. And that is where I am at and what we're kind of talking about here. But yeah, that occurs kind of at a range of ages, but typically after puberty would have started. So, you're looking at teenagers mostly. And also people, can start anytime later in life because people go through their gender journeys at all different ages.
This is just making me think about a little argument I got in on Twitter back when I was on Twitter, which I am not on Twitter anymore. Thank God.
I was never on Twitter. I was right all along.
It was a dark place. I somehow, I think it started with a conversation about the San Jose State volleyball team and ended up puberty blockers. And this guy was explaining to me mansplaining, as he happened to be doing about a lot of things, that
as he told you how to protect women.
Yes, he told me that I'm not a real feminist. Actually, I'm an anti-feminist. But he said, well, there's all this evidence that people are staying on these things for like into adulthood. Like, so it's not like just this safe buying time kind of thing. It's like permanent. But I think that you kind of addressed that when you pointed out that like once you have decided, okay, I bought time, I know which gender I am, I know which way I want this to go. After you've gotten that pause and been able to process all of it, that is when you go to a hormone replacement therapy.
Right. And yeah, as many transgender women will tell you, testosterone is a giant pain in the butt. And unless you have some kind of surgery to stop your body's production of it, like, it's going to hang out and create unwanted changes. And so, yes, part of your hormone replacement therapy, you do have to, if you're a trans woman or you're taking estrogen, you do have to continue suppressing the production of testosterone. But crucially, again, you're not just like leaving your body without any hormones, because yes, that is a bad thing. Hormones are good. Your body needs hormones. But yeah, you have estrogen filling some of those roles. And some of what again, bone density is the one that I see brought up the most frequently. But broadly speaking, cisgender women are also more at risk for problems with bone density, osteoporosis, that kind of thing. It's why you're recommended to do weight training, especially as you get older, because it helps prevent that. So we're not talking about this horrible problem that is being inflicted upon people when it need it. Be like, cisgender women deal with this all the time. And
right. And that when you reach perimenopause, highly recommended that you start taking estrogen because your body's not producing as much of it, but it prevents other medical problems.
Right. Like there are all sorts of random things that human bodies do, and there are all sorts of courses of action that we take to address those. And hormone therapy is addressing one set of random problems that the human body and brain has sometimes. And yes, there might be other things that pop up, but those are also things that can be addressed.
All right. So that is pretty much the story up until your age 18, because as we have said a million times on this show, doctors do not generally, I shouldn't even say generally. I said it was really rare one time to somebody and they were like, see, it does happen. It is not best practices for doctors to do gender affirming surgery on anybody under the age of 18. And it only happens if it is deemed a life-saving intervention, correct?
Yeah, broadly speaking. And I mean, there are some instances where top surgery is considered less of an extreme case. Like I think the bar is a little bit lower in that case, but certainly bottom surgery. So, vaginoplasties and phalloplasties are very much, almost exclusively an over 18 thing.
And I guess, teenagers, this is one of those things that I kind of get stuck on when people are concerned about some of these things, that teenage girls change the size of their breasts for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, right.
Like I had a friend who had breast reduction surgery because she had back problems.
Right. Like it's not that uncommon.
Well, and we're not
Yeah,
talking about a 9-year-old saying, I think I'm this, not this, and their parents taking them in to get surgery. And I think that's
exactly.
what people think is happening.
Literally, they think that a kid, not even that their parents take them in to get surgery, that their kid goes to school one day and then comes back a different gender,
I
like
forgot
complete with surgery.
right. Okay, yeah. So generally, surgery is not an option. And for anybody that wants to pursue that route of surgery, there's a very detailed process they have to go through.
Right. You cannot walk into a clinic anywhere and be like, give me this surgery. I mean, you can't do that with any surgery. Right.
Not
These
from real doctors.
these surgeries in particular, there's a very, very kind of strict route that you have to follow, which involves, a certain length of counseling. It typically will involve a diagnosis of gender dysphoria that has been present for an extended period of time. And then when you actually go in to a surgeon, they will require 2 to 3 letters from different therapists saying, yes, this is an appropriate course of action. Yes, this person is ready for this. Yeah, it's a whole thing.
So the reasons that people decide to, say, do hormone therapy is very different. I mean, there are a lot of different reasons from going all from wanting to transition completely from one gender to another to just wanting to be less on one extreme or the other, which is, I think, if I'm understanding correctly, what you are hoping to achieve.
Yeah. My feeling was that, there were aspects of my gender presentation that I wasn't going to be happy with the way that my body developed, and that I would feel happier and more confident if I were on testosterone.
By the way, can I just interject and also say that there are plenty of men who make that same choice just because they want to look different?
Yeah, this is very true. Again, as we've said repeatedly, cis people get hormone therapy all the time.
Trying to look muscular and masculine and taking testosterone is gender affirming care.
Literally, it is, yes. So, yeah. And I mean, I think here is a helpful point to bring up the difference between gender dysphoria and gender euphoria. Gender dysphoria is like a clinical diagnosis that talks about the experience of identifying as a different gender from the sex that you were assigned at birth. And it is typically associated with like negative feelings of, I don't belong in my body. This is not how I am supposed to exist. The classic way that it's explained is I'm in the wrong body. Gender euphoria is kind of a more recent term that I think has largely grown out of the transgender community that expresses not those sort of negative feelings, but the joy or the relief or the excitement that comes with, being gendered correctly, or looking at yourself in the mirror and being like, I'm really happy with how I look. My appearance reflects how I feel like I'm supposed to look. And that is sometimes 2 sides of the same coin, and sometimes not as much. So for me, a lot of the testosterone experiences are more a matter of gender euphoria, like, oh, I didn't necessarily hate how my higher voice sounded, but I really like how a lower voice sounds. So they can operate a little bit independently of each other as well.
On the subject of gender dysphoria, just because I'm trying to address things that, might pop into people's heads. When people say, well, I work out all the time, I feel like I should look a lot better than I do. I'm not looking in the mirror and seeing the person that I feel like I should look like. How do you explain to them that that's different?
Do you look in the mirror and think, I would be happy with myself if I looked like a man or a woman? Because if the answer is no, then it's different from gender dysphoria.
I think people just say like, well, lots of people aren't happy with the body they're in.
I mean, yeah, and I mean that is a separate term, dysmorphia, where yeah, you look at your body and you're like, oh my God, I hate this. And that's actually like something I experience as well. Like I'm very self-conscious about my weight in a lot of ways. And there are certainly things that trigger that feeling as well, but they're also distinct. And in some cases actually contradictory. So like when it comes to my gender dysphoria, I am very uncomfortable with like having breasts. Like I don't like it. It's ugh. When it comes to body dysmorphia, though, I look in the mirror and I'm like, well, I feel like I would look worse if I didn't have breasts. And they're coming from two different places. Like
Mm.
one is coming from my gender identity, and one is coming from how I feel about like my weight and how I look and how I fill out clothes. And they're different. I'm not sure how to explain it more clearly than that.
I think that makes sense. I'm dismayed that I'm not tall every time I look in the mirror, but it has nothing to do with gender.
Right. Actually, that's a good example.
I should be a tall person. Clothes look better on tall people. There's that. But also, I just want to be able to reach things. It's infuriating. Maybe that's, psychology, right? Like, I don't like asking for help. I hate asking for help, but I have to ask people to get things down for me. And that is distressing. Anyway, that's an aside.
Uh-huh. Right. And I mean, I think it's infantilizing to assume that trans people are incapable of distinguishing between those two things, especially when it's adults. But also, it's unreasonable to say that children, especially with the help of, trained licensed counselors, can't sort through their feelings as well. Like, kids can be self-aware, believe it or not, especially again when there are all of these requirements that literally say this treatment is not available unless you have a level of self-awareness.
Right. Like therapists can judge if a kid is just being like, I mean, it might come down to all sorts of different things that they think aren't fair about being a girl or whatever, like a therapist can suss out whether they just are like unhappy with the role of women in the world as opposed to in distress about the body they're in.
Right. If we use that example you were just talking about, like, I want to be taller so I can reach more things. Why is it that not being able to reach things makes you feel insecure? Oh, it has nothing to do with your gender identity. It has to do with not wanting to ask for help. Okay, next.
Yeah. So, okay. In your personal situation, you are just trying to make yourself more gender neutral.
Yeah. A lot of it has to do with how, again, people perceive me, right? Like how people make assumptions when they look at me.
Okay. And as far as, you've been on testosterone for a year, any regrets, anything you would change, any side effects that you're like, I can live with it, but not crazy about it?
I'm sort of peeved that the biggest thing I've noticed is just that I'm hairier. Like,
that's not top of your list.
It doesn't bother me necessarily. Okay, like I wouldn't want facial hair, primarily because it's so high maintenance. I like to joke that actually my gender identity is just lazy. I want whatever requires the least effort. And facial hair requires a lot of effort. Like I don't want to have to shave every day, but I don't want a beard, which means I don't want facial hair. And so I haven't had that at this point, which is good. But yeah, like just hair like all over my arms, all over my legs, more like whatever. It's not a problem, but I'm like, is that really what we get? Okay, whatever. If I were to make a list of the things that I was really hoping to get out of it, it would be a deeper, more androgynous voice and weight redistribution to have a kind of more. I always be cautious when you say androgynous when it comes to appearance, because a lot of times that actually just means effeminate male.
That's exactly what I just pictured.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like a lot of our definition of androgyny is rooted in what we think of as masculine and then just like lightened a little bit. And that is unreasonable.
It doesn't mean David Bowie.
It can mean David Bowie.
It can be.
Yeah.
All androgynous people are not David Bowie.
Exactly.
David Bowie was an androgynous person.
Yeah. And a lot of times, if you see a skirt, you're automatically like, oh, that's not androgynous, because femininity has been so alienated from our definition of androgynous. But it's like, well, if pants aren't masculine, why do skirts have to be feminine? Anyway, tangent, but keep that in mind throughout this discussion. But yes, kind of a less feminine silhouette. Let's go with that. And I suppose I would have to compare a side-by-side picture to know if that's the case. But anyway, and then I would like to be more muscular, but that is probably more to do with body dysmorphia than it is to do with dysphoria. So as far as, things I'm hoping to get out of it, those are probably the top things on the list. According to my boss, my voice does not sound masculine, which I'm like, okay, way to shoot down my hopes and dreams there. But there was also an interaction we had at the beginning of the summer where I was asking Irene, if my fiance, if my voice sounded like it had gotten deeper over the last, at that point, 5, 6 months. And my brother KJ also happened to be in the room. And Irene goes, well, say something in a high pitched voice. And I was like, okay, I'm saying something in a high pitched voice. And then she's like, yeah, it's gotten deeper. And KJ's like, oh, wow. So apparently my voice has changed. I do think I have a wider, or not wider necessarily, because I haven't been doing my vocal exercises. I did hope to maintain my upper singing register, and I think that's definitely gotten lower, but I can sing deeper now, which is very exciting to me. But yes, body hair, not top of priorities. Emotionally, I think because, testosterone is a lot of times associated with more anger, more difficulty controlling impulses and that kind of thing. It's something I've definitely been kind of thinking about, and it would have been sensible to like keep an emotion journal or something, but I haven't. But I do think I have noticed myself being like, oh wow, you're very angry, or you're very angry at everyone today, or that probably made you angrier than it should have, which wasn't an unusual experience for me before testosterone either. I think what I would say is that it was extremely alleviated when I started anxiety medication. And so I went through a couple of years there where I was like, wow, I'm not angry at everyone like constantly. I'm not angry at people even all that often. This is cool. And, maybe I'm like angrier sometimes, but it's not something that I feel like I don't have control over either. There's enough distance there that I can be like, you're feeling angry, aren't you? Maybe that's because of testosterone. Maybe just chill. And then every once in a while, there'll be things, where you're like, that was a little bit impulsive, wasn't it? Or maybe you wouldn't have done that a year ago. But again, not something that I think has really substantially impacted my day-to-day life, or, something that I think has been harmful in any way. Maybe it'll be good. Maybe the ski season will be good because I'll be like just that little bit more willing to like go for things and not sit there at the top of the slope like, oh no, I'm going to die.
Maybe. I can't imagine. Well, I don't know. I can't imagine not feeling that, sitting at the top and like thinking I'm going to die. But at the same time, like the only way I can do it is to completely impulsively like fling myself into it. So I don't know. I don't know where I am.
See, like I just need to be more impulsive.
Just basic survival, really, once I have skis on my feet.
If you imagine that there's a bear at the top of the hill.
I think I've actually done that.
Yeah. Of course, my gym teacher in elementary school, when I couldn't do a pull-up, was like, imagine that there's a dog that's going to bite you if you don't pull yourself up onto this bar. And I still couldn't do a pull-up. So like,
if you can't do a pull-up, you can't do a pull-up. Maybe if there had been an actual vicious dog.
Yeah, then you get adrenaline. But I'm sorry, my imagination's just not that good. Also, I think I would probably be more inclined to like kick the vicious dog in the snout.
One day, I don't recommend this at all, but I was out running and this dog came like running towards me, barking and snarling. And I was like, I mean, what else am I going to do? So I was like, oh, puppy. And it just stopped and looked at me like, what the? And then it turned and walked away.
Speaking of vicious dogs.
You go. Aw. It's just parked at your feet.
Apparently he liked getting attention the other week, and so now this is what he does. He just hangs out here and waits for his moment in the spotlight.
Aw, Hugo, our little mascot. He's adorable. Well, is there anything else that you feel listeners should know, or anything about your experience that you would share to somebody that was maybe where you were a few years ago?
Well, I think we've talked about this before, but I think it's really important that we not have really restrictive policies in place, like what a lot of states are pursuing right now, making it more and more difficult to access these kinds of treatments. I mean, in part because they're life-saving medical care, but also because, I didn't like, I think I was diagnosed with gender dysphoria like maybe around 15 years old-ish. 15, 16, somewhere in there. And I did not pursue hormone therapy immediately because I was like, well, I don't know if this is something that I want. I don't know if it would be beneficial for me. I wasn't secure enough in myself to know that that was what I wanted. And because I knew that it wasn't going anywhere, that if I had later decided that it was something that I wanted, that I could always pursue it, I had that space, right? And the same thing goes for surgery, right? Starting testosterone also provided, kind of an experience of, oh, are these changes things that I like? Do I like presenting more masculine? Is my sense of self benefiting from feeling more masculine? Does that mean that, there are surgeries that I would like to have in the future? And that's not, I'm not like 100% on all of those questions yet, but it's been really beneficial for exploring my gender identity. And if those treatments had been cut off, if I'd felt like, oh my God, I have to do this now, or like I might never be able to. I mean, there are absolutely trans people out there who are like, oh my God, I have to get surgery now because it might not be legal 2 years from now. I'm a little bit in that boat because I know that I do want a gender affirming hysterectomy. I'm like, oh, well, maybe I would have like taken it but not been too urgent about it. But now I'm like, I have to do it as soon as possible because I'm worried that gender affirming clinics are going to start shutting down or, there won't be any insurance coverage left for them. And that's not a good thing. You don't want people to be making these decisions because they're worried that they won't be able to make them in the future. You want them to make the decision when they're ready for it. And
Right.
so by restricting access to this healthcare, you're putting people in a much worse position in terms of feeling pressured to pursue certain treatment options.
Right. Making it more likely that they're going to make rash decisions.
Exactly. Also, on the note of rash decisions, and you hear people talk about like, oh, it's so like the irreversible changes as soon as you start hormone therapy. You don't start seeing any changes for a couple of months. And then when you do, they're gradual. Like, it's just so frustrating to me. It's this thing that it's kind of behind a lot of the arguments that, like, as soon as you make the decision that you're trans, like, it's irreversible and you can't come back from it. Like, yes, after a lifetime of gender affirming medical care, you're not going to be able to go back to living as your assigned sex very easily, mainly in terms of how people perceive you. But there's a lot of space between that. Like, there's a lot of space between point A and point B where there might not be irreversible changes or the changes might not be that substantial. And if you're being, self aware and reflective through that journey, like, you have time to be like, oh, I don't like all this body hair. I think I'm going to stop with the testosterone.
Right. Well, and I mean, so if somebody mistakenly thought what they were experiencing was gender dysphoria and started on hormones or whatever, and then presumably if that was not the right choice for them, then they really are experiencing gender dysphoria. And that
Right.
I wouldn't think would take long enough to figure out that like major changes have happened, unless it takes the major
Yeah.
changes to start experiencing that. But I don't know. I think it's just, yeah, it's much more of a gradual thing than people, I think, often think it is.
Right. Yeah, that's very much been my experience.
Well, that has been informative. I hope it has been informative to the audience too. Is there anything else you feel like we missed?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, as always, if you have questions, comments, let us know. Next episode, we're going to revisit that episode we did where we said, why are they running ads against trans people? Because obviously people don't care, because apparently people do care. And so we're just going to dissect that whole issue a little bit and talk about what should Democrats have done differently? Is people caring about that kind of a cover for other issues? So we'll dig into that a little bit. In the meantime, I hope everybody has a good Thanksgiving. Hopefully you will be spending it in a welcoming and accepting environment. We'll catch you next time.
Bye. If you found this podcast helpful, interesting, or just mildly amusing, please consider rating and reviewing us on your podcasting platform of choice. It really helps us to get the word out there and spread this information as far as we can.
And as always, check out our website at queerkidsstraightmom.com. You can find us on social media, Instagram, and Threads at queerkid.straightmom, Blue Sky at qksm.bsky.social, and Facebook at Queer Kids Straight Mom.
And if you're feeling especially generous, please consider joining our Patreon by searching Queer Kids Straight Mom. It helps us fund this podcast.